Okay guys, so welcome to another lesson of, so last week we talked about finding slope given two ordered pairs or on a graph. Today I'm going to introduce how to find slope given a t-table or horizontal t-table, and then how to use the slope formula. You don't really need to use the slope formula. I like to use the slope formula because it makes things nice and simple. And then at the end I'll show you guys how to graph using slope and a given point. So make sure you guys are whisking this in your composition book. Add it to last week's whisk on how to find slope. So on your screen right now, you'll see a x table and a y table. It's just a t table. So here's x. We have -2. When x is -2, I get y is 3. These are individual ordered pairs if you want to look at them. So this one says determine the slope of the line represented by the table of values. The first thing I want to do is make sure that you guys remember that slope is really the change in y over the change in x. So I'm going to find the change in y. So here, from 3 to 5, that's +2. 5 to 7, +2. 7 to 9, +2, and so forth, +2. And if I wanted to continue the pattern, I know that it's going to be 13 because it's also +2. That's the cool thing about slope. Slope will help you find another point on the graph. Going over to my x, -2 to -1 is +1, -1 to 0 is +1. So my change in y over my change in x here is +2 over +1, or just 2. So my slope is 2. And that's how you do slope on a table. A different way to do slope is a horizontal table. Here, again, slope is change in y over change in x, which is equal to my change in y. 24 to 40 is +16. +16. I'm just making sure that the rate of change is constant. And then 3 to 5 is +2, +2, +2, and my change in y even tells you right here is 16 over 2, or just 8 over 1, which is just 8. The cool thing about a horizontal table is that the general rule of thumb is that the top row is always your input or your x value, and then the bottom one's always your y value. But if it's not, they will tell you which one is your x and your y. But if they just give it to you as is, like I am on the screen, I even labeled it. The top row is always x and the bottom row is always y. So my slope here is just 8. Next one. Okay, the slope formula. So last week we talked about this idea of something like this. Today as well, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so from here, that's +2, +2. I'm just making something up. When you're doing the change in y over the change in x, you're really finding the difference in y over the difference in x. So because we're finding the difference, we can just use the slope formula. The slope formula on the screen, make sure you write this down, is, I'm going to write it down, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now this whole superscript of 2 and 1, it doesn't really matter which one you put first, you just have to match them up. Notice how both of them, y2, x2, y1, x1, they're on top of each other. If you reverse it, then your slope will be different. And all you have to do is, here's my ordered pairs that they gave me. I have -2, 0, and 3, 1. First thing I need to do is label each one the corresponding way. x1, this is my first ordered point. X coordinate point is x. This is my y1. This is x2. This is y2. And all I have to do is draw my division bar, put in parentheses, minus. It's always difference. The difference between the 2 points is always going to be minus. That's the mathematical word for minus. And then what I'm going to do is make this a little neater. I'm just going to put in the value that they give me for each other coordinate point. So y2 is 1, y1 is 0, x2 is 3, x1 is -2. Now, it's very important that you don't drop the negative symbol. You always carry it with it. So look what I have here on the board. I have y2 minus y1, double check, x2 minus x1. 1 minus 0 is 1. 3 minus the negative 2 is the same thing as adding the opposite because we don't really subtract in math. 1 is 5. So my slope here is 1/5. Just to demonstrate, you can also check your work without using the slope. I'm going to check my work using a t-table. X, y, put in my first ordered pair they gave me, 2, 0, 3, 1, and just go, okay, how do I get from 0 to 1? That's plus 1. How do I get from negative 2 to positive 3? Well, negative 2 to 0 is plus 2. 0 to 3 is plus 3, so that's plus 5. It's still 1/5. You don't necessarily have to use the slope formula. I like to use the slope formula because it's sometimes the more you use the formula, the quicker you're going to be at it, and you don't really need to go back to the t-table or the graph. Using the slope formula on the table, same thing. It does not matter which one you can use. You can use this one, and you can use this one. You can use, obviously, you can use the way I showed you with the change in y over change in x, but I'm going to go ahead and write slope is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which is equal to, fill in the blanks, just setting up, getting used to using the formula. Remember, it's the difference. So this right here, my two order pair that I'm going to choose to use is 3 and 24 and 0 and 6. I'll make this x1, y1, x2, y2. And then just remember that's y2 minus y1. So y2 is 24, y1 is 6, x2 is 3, and x1 is 0. And then here, let me move things over a little bit. Oops. There we go. And then I have 24 minus 6 is 18. Over 3 minus 0 is 3. 18 over 3, my slope is 6. And that's how you use the slope formula. If you want to quickly check your work on the screen, right here, you can also go 6 to 12 is plus 6. 0 to 1 is plus 1, so my slope change in y over change in x is still 6 over 1. You always want to simplify your slope to its simplest form until you can't bring it down anymore. So in this case, it's just 6. So here on the screen, I have using the slope formula and using finding the rate of change on the table. Either one works. Just keep practicing using the slope formula. So why would I use the slope formula? I would use the slope formula for if it's the same thing as using the XY table, but really I like to use the slope formula if it's really big numbers, because if you use really big numbers and you put it into the t-table, you're eventually going to have to find a difference between the two numbers anyways. So for example, I have negative 2, 5, and 999,998 and 2,000,005. Find the slope to those 2 points. Yes, you can put it in the t-table, but you still have to find the difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the slope formula right here. Y2, so this is x1, y1, x2, y2. Now the y, remember the x1 and the y2 is just when it shows up. You can reverse the two pairs, but just make sure that they correspond with each other, they're the same. So if you always have x2 and y2 together, because that is the second point. And then so slope is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which is 2,000,005 minus 5 over 990 minus negative 2. And then I'll move it over so we can see it a little bit better. And then 2,000,005 minus 5 is just going to be 2,000,000 over 999,998 minus negative 2 is the same thing as adding the opposite, which is going to end up being 1,000,000. Okay, and then from here, all you got to do is just cross out your zeros, and I get 20 over 1, so my slope, 20 over 1 is the same thing as 20. There you go. So that's how you use the slope formula. Be careful of how you do, excuse me, that's 100,000, not 1 million. So all you have to do is just use the slope formula, make sure that you guys are labeling your coordinate points, x1, y1, x2, y2, and then you just use the slope formula. Last question. Given point C at -4, 2, and slope 3/2. Find two other points on that line. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to graph -4, 2. So go starting at 0, 0. You always start at 0, 0. Go over -4 up 2. There's point C. Now I need to find another point or two more points. Good thing this slope, this is kind of like your GPS. Okay, it tells you where to move. So my slope is 3/2. Remember that slope is change in y over change in x. So that's a +3. So I'm going to go up 3, 1, 2, 3, and then over 2, over to the right 2, 1, 2. There's another point. And then if you want to work backwards, because -3 over -2 is going to be a negative over negative, which is the same thing as 3/2. So going down 1, 2, 3, and then to the left 1, 2. You have this nice little straight line right here that will then give you your two other points. Obviously this is a function, and then we'll go more into functions, but it doesn't really stop. It goes on indefinitely in both directions. So I have -2, 5. So my first pair is -2, +5. And then my second one would be at -6, -1. That's not just the two answers of this question. You can pick any point off that line. Another way you can do it is kind of build a t-table. You know, you start at, here's my x, here's my y. I have -4 over -4, +2. I know my change in, I'll switch colors. My change in y is +3, so +3. There's 5. I know my change in x is +2, so that's -2. So right there, -2, +5, and -6, 1. So you can use the t-table or you can use the graph. Slope is cool like that. As long as you have slope, your GPS, you can move anywhere on the graph. So that's all I have for today. Make sure you guys are whisking the video, and then we'll check it in class.